The oven timer screamed at exactly 5:30 in the morning, and Sophie Chen's hands were already burned. She yanked the tray of sourdough loaves from the ancient oven, her forearms protesting the weight. The bakery smelled like heaven: butter, yeast, caramelized sugar. But Sophie had long stopped noticing. When you've been awake for 19 hours and your rent is 3 days overdue, even heaven starts to smell like exhaustion. She set the bread on the cooling rack and checked her phone. No messages. No miracle text saying the hospital had forgiven her mother's medical bills. No notification that her student loans had suddenly disappeared. Just the same reality she'd been living for the past 8 months, since Mom's stroke had turned their lives upside down. 24 years old, and Sophie's world had shrunk to the size of Moretti's neighborhood bakery. 6 days a week, 4 a.m. to 8 p.m. shifts. The pay was barely minimum wage, but old Mr. Moretti let her take home the day-old bread. That counted for something. "Sophie, Mr. Moretti's gravelly voice called from the front. "The Castellano order ready?" "5 minutes, she called back, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. The Castellano family ordered 3 dozen cannoli every Saturday morning. Sophie had no idea who they were, but Mr. Moretti treated their order like it came from royalty. He'd gone pale the one time she'd suggested maybe they could just buy regular cannoli instead of the special recipe he only made for them. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." Sophie piped the ricotta filling with hands that had memorized the motion. 300 cannoli per week for 8 months straight. She could do it in her sleep, and sometimes she basically did. Her reflection in the stainless steel counter showed a woman she barely recognized. Dark, circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour dusting her cheek like war paint. This wasn't the plan. The plan had been law school. Sophie had been accepted to Northwestern, full-ride scholarship. Her mom had cried happy tears. Her dad, who'd passed when she was 12, would have been so proud. But the stroke happened 3 weeks before orientation. Mom's right side went limp during Sunday dinner. One minute she was laughing at Sophie's story about her barista job. The next, she was on the floor, and Sophie was screaming for someone to call 911. The scholarship didn't wait. The hospital bills didn't either. So here she was, making cannoli at dawn instead of studying contract law. "Sophie, the order," Mr. Moretti reminded her, his tone gentle. He knew her story. Everyone in the neighborhood knew everyone's story. That's how Little Italy worked. Your tragedy became community property. She boxed the cannoli with practiced efficiency, adding the special gold ribbon Mr. Moretti insisted on for the Castellano family. "Ready." Mr. Moretti inspected the boxes like he was checking diamonds, then nodded. "Good girl. You have the touch, just like your grandmother." Sophie's grandmother had worked in this same bakery 50 years ago. It's why Mr. Moretti had hired Sophie when she'd shown up desperate and crying. Legacy mattered here. Family mattered. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus, the same man who picked up the Castellano order every Saturday, stepped inside. He was probably in his 40s, with a neat beard and eyes that never stopped moving. He dressed too well for a delivery guy. Expensive watch, tailored suit, shoes that cost more than Sophie's monthly rent. "Morning, Mr. Moretti," Marcus said, his voice respectful but not warm. "Morning, Sophie." "Morning," Sophie managed, handing over the boxes. Their fingers didn't touch. Marcus always made sure of that, like proximity to her might contaminate him. "Tell Alessa the cannoli are perfect. Today," Mr. Moretti said. Marcus nodded and left without another word. "One day you're going to tell me who these Castellano people are," Sophie said, starting on the next batch of bread. Mr. Moretti's expression closed like a door slamming shut. "Sophie, some questions in this neighborhood you don't ask." The warning in his voice made her skin prickle. She'd lived in Little Italy her whole life, but there were shadows here she'd never learned to read. Families that everyone knew but no one discussed. Men who commanded respect through silence. She didn't push. Pushing meant trouble, and she had enough trouble already. The day crawled by in waves of flour and sugar. By 7 p.m., every muscle in Sophie's body begged for mercy. She'd made 247 pieces of bread. Her phone showed 6 missed calls from the hospital's billing department. She'd answer tomorrow. Maybe. If she could figure out what to say besides, "I don't have the money. Go home," Mr. Moretti said, shuffling out from the back office. "You look dead on your feet. I need to clean the—" "Go home, Sophie. I can push a broom." His wrinkled hand patted her shoulder. "You're a good girl. Too good for this old man's bakery." Sophie wanted to argue, but her feet made the decision for her. They carried her toward the door, toward the promise of her tiny apartment, and the couch that doubled as her bed. "Sophie," Mr. Moretti called as she reached the exit. "Take the bread. The sourdough and the rolls. They'll go stale by morning." She looked at the rack. At least 24 pieces, enough to feed her for days. "Mr. Moretti, that's too much. You could sell them tomorrow at discount. Take them." His tone left no room for argument. Sophie loaded the bread into her worn backpack, the weight pressing against her spine. "Thank you. Your grandmother would have done the same for my daughter," he said simply. "Family takes care of family." Outside, the September evening had that perfect crispness that made Chicago feel alive. Sophie breathed in deep, letting the cool air fill her lungs. For just a moment, she let herself feel grateful. She had bread. She had a job. Mom was alive, even if recovery was slow. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was her life. She was 3 blocks from home when she heard it, crying. Not the normal crying of a toddler having a tantrum or a teenager dealing with heartbreak. This was the sound of pure terror, desperate, hiccuping sobs that made her chest constrict. Sophie stopped walking. The street was empty, the shops closed for the evening. Just streetlights casting long shadows and the distant sound of traffic. She should keep walking, should mind her business, should remember what Mr. Moretti always said about questions you don't ask. But the crying continued. "Damn it," Sophie muttered, turning toward the sound. She found him in the alley behind Gino's restaurant. A little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, huddled against a dumpster like he was trying to disappear. His clothes were expensive. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sophie's entire wardrobe, but his face was streaked with tears and dirt, and his small body shook with cold and fear. "Hey," Sophie said softly, approaching slowly like he was a frightened animal. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" The boy's head snapped up. His eyes were enormous, dark brown and swimming with terror. For a second, Sophie saw something in his face that made her heart stop. A specific kind of fear, the kind that came from knowing something terrible had happened, even if you didn't understand what. "Where's your mom?" Sophie asked, crouching down to his level despite the puddle soaking into her jeans. "Where's your dad?" The boy just cried harder. Sophie's mind raced. It was almost 8 p.m. The alley was dark. A child this young shouldn't be alone, especially not in this neighborhood. "Okay," she said, keeping her voice gentle. "Okay, I'm going to figure this out. But first, are you hurt? Did someone hurt you?" He shook his head, but kept crying. "Are you cold?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. A small nod. Sophie pulled off her jacket, her only decent jacket, and wrapped it around his shoulders. It swallowed him, but at least he stopped shaking so violently. "Better?" Another small nod. I'm Sophie," she said. "What's your name?" "And Nico," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Nico, that's a strong name." Sophie sat down fully, ignoring the wet pavement seeping through her jeans. "You're very brave, Nico, but I need you to help me, okay? Can you tell me your last name, or your phone number?" Nico's bottom lip trembled. I don't know. I don't remember. Too young to memorize phone numbers." Sophie cursed internally. Okay, that's fine. Do you remember where you live? What street?" "The big house," Nico said. "With the fountain. And the gate with the lion." "A lion." Sophie tried to picture it. Little Italy had some fancy houses, but most were old brownstones. "What color is the gate?" "Black. And gold." Nico's eyes welled up again. "I want my daddy." "I know, sweetie, I know." Sophie's heart was breaking. "We're going to find him, I promise." Her phone was at 18% battery. She should call the police. But something made her hesitate. The expensive clothes. The mention of a gate with lions. The way Mr. Moretti had warned her about questions you don't ask. "Nico, is your daddy's name Castellano?" The boy's face transformed. "You know my daddy?" "Oh God. Oh no. The Castellano family. The cannoli order. Marcus with his expensive suit and careful hands. Mr. Moretti's fear." Sophie's stomach dropped. She'd found a child from one of those families. The shadow families. The ones you didn't talk about. But looking at Nico's tear-stained face, she couldn't think about any of that. He was just a scared little boy who needed help. "I know where to find him," Sophie said, hoping it was true. "But first, you must be starving. When did you last eat?" Nico shrugged, his small body still trembling despite the jacket. Sophie swung her backpack around and unzipped it. The bread from Mr. Moretti's bakery was still warm. She pulled out a sourdough roll and broke it in half, handing him the bigger piece. "Here. It's fresh from today." Nico took it with both hands, holding it like it was precious. "For me?" "For you." He bit into it, and for the first time, his expression softened. Just a little. Just enough to remind Sophie that underneath the fear, he was still a child. She ate her half slowly, watching him. "Good? Really good," Nico said around a mouthful. "Better than Mrs. Rosa's bread." "Who's Mrs. Rosa?" "She makes dinner at my house, but she's mean sometimes. She says I'm too loud." Nico's voice dropped to a whisper. "I try to be quiet." Something about the way he said it made Sophie's chest ache. "You don't have to be quiet with me. You can be as loud as you want." Nico smiled. Actually smiled. Small and hesitant, but real. They sat together in the alley, eating bread while the sky darkened from deep blue to black. Sophie knew she should move, should do something, should figure out how to get this child home, but part of her wanted to stretch this moment, before reality crashed in, before she had to face whatever came next. "Sophie?" Nico said quietly. "Yeah? Thank you for the bread." "You're welcome, sweetheart. And for not leaving me." Her throat tightened. "I would never leave you." The sound of engines shattered the moment. Not one car, but several, moving fast through the neighborhood streets. Sophie's head jerked up, her pulse spiking. The engines grew louder, closer, until headlights flooded the mouth of the alley. She instinctively pulled Nico behind her, her body moving before her brain could process the threat. Car. Doors opened. Not slammed. Opened with controlled precision. Footsteps approached. Multiple sets, moving in perfect coordination. "Nico?" A voice called out. Male, urgent, edged with barely controlled panic. "Nico! Daddy!" Nico scrambled to his feet, trying to run toward the voice. Sophie caught his arm. "Wait. We need to make sure." But Nico pulled free and ran into the light. A figure emerged from the shadows. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in all black. Sophie couldn't see his face, but she could feel his presence. The way air seemed to shift around him. The way her instincts screamed both danger and something else. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness. The man dropped to his knees, and Nico crashed into him with enough force to knock over anyone smaller. But this man didn't move. He wrapped his arms around his son and held him like Nico was the only thing keeping him alive. "Where were you?" The man's voice broke, just slightly. "Do you have any idea, I thought?" "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry. I got lost, and I was scared." And Nico's words tumbled out in a rush. "Shh. Shh. You're safe now." The man pulled back, checking Nico over with frantic hands. "You're not hurt? Did anyone?" "Sophie helped me," Nico said, turning to point at her. "She gave me her jacket and bread. And she stayed with me, so I wasn't alone." The man's head turned toward Sophie. Even in the darkness, even with the headlights creating harsh shadows, she could see his eyes. Dark, intense, and absolutely terrifying in their focus. They pinned her in place like she was a butterfly in a collection. He stood slowly, still holding Nico against his chest with one arm. Sophie realized with growing dread how big he was. Not bulky, but solid, powerful. The kind of build that came from real work, not gym posturing. "You," he said, his voice different now, controlled, assessing. "You found him." It wasn't a question. Sophie nodded, not trusting her voice. More men emerged from the vehicles. At least 5, maybe 6. All dressed in dark suits, all moving with that same coordinated precision. This wasn't a family looking for a lost child. This was an operation. Marcus stepped forward, his expression grim. "Sir, we need to, not now." The man cut him off without looking away from Sophie. "You stayed with him." "He was scared," Sophie said, finding her voice. It came out steadier than she felt. "I couldn't just leave him." "Why not?" The question was genuine, curious. Most people would have called the police and walked away. He's 6 years old and terrified. I'm not most people." Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. "No," he said quietly. "I don't think you are." He shifted Nico to his other arm and took a step closer. Sophie forced herself not to back away. She lifted her chin and met his eyes, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie Chen." "Sophie." He said it slowly, like he was memorizing it. "I'm Alessandro Castellano, and you just saved the most important thing in my world." The name hit her like a physical blow. Castellano, the family Mr. Moretti feared, the order that came with gold ribbon and whispered warnings. Sophie's mouth went dry. "I owe you a debt," Alessandro continued, his tone making it clear this wasn't casual gratitude. This was something else, something binding. "In my family, debts are taken seriously." "You don't owe me anything," Sophie said quickly. "I'm just glad he's safe." Nevertheless, Alessandro's eyes never left hers. "You gave him your jacket." Sophie glanced down at Nico, who was still wrapped in her worn denim jacket. "He can keep it. It's not Marcus," Alessandro said. Marcus stepped forward immediately, pulling something from his jacket. He held out a thick envelope. "I don't want money," Sophie said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "I helped because he needed help, not for a reward." Alessandro tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "Then what do you want?" "Nothing. I want nothing." "Everyone wants something, Sophie Chen." The way he said her name made her stomach flip. Not threatening, exactly, but not safe either. "I need to go," Sophie said, taking a step back. "I'm glad Nico's okay. That's all that matters." She turned to leave. "Sophie." Alessandro's voice stopped her. Not because it was loud, but because it carried absolute command. The kind of voice you obeyed without questioning why. She looked back. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving him bread when he was hungry, for staying when you could have left." His expression softened, just slightly, "for being kind when kindness is rare." Nico lifted his head from his father's shoulder. "Bye, Sophie." "Bye, Nico." Sophie's chest hurt. "Be good, okay? And try not to get lost again." "I won't." Nico smiled, the same small smile from before. "Can I keep the bread?" Sophie couldn't help but smile back. "It's yours." She walked away before anyone could stop her again. Before Alessandro Castellano could say anything else that made her feel like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Behind her, she heard Nico's voice. "Daddy, I like her. She's nice." "Yes." Alessandro's reply was quiet, thoughtful. "She is." Sophie didn't look back. She walked 3 blocks to her apartment, climbed the 4 flights of stairs, and locked the door behind her. Only then did she let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking, her jacket was gone, her bread was gone. And she'd just had a conversation with Alessandro Castellano, a man whose name Mr. Moretti wouldn't even say out loud. She pressed her palms against her eyes. "What did you just do, Sophie?" But she knew. She'd done what any decent person would do. She'd helped a scared child. The fact that the child's father was apparently someone important, someone dangerous, someone whose debt felt more like a threat than gratitude, that was just bad luck. Sophie changed into her sleep clothes and collapsed on her couch. Tomorrow she'd forget this happened. Tomorrow she'd go back to the bakery and her normal, exhausting, safe life. Tomorrow. But as she drifted toward sleep, all she could see was Alessandro Castellano's eyes, dark and intense and focused entirely on her like she was something rare and valuable and his. She shivered, pulled her blanket tighter, and tried very hard not to think about what it meant that the most dangerous man in Little Italy now knew her name. Sophie woke at 3:30 a.m. to the sound of her phone ringing. For a disoriented moment, she thought it was her alarm. Then she saw the unknown number glowing in the darkness. Her stomach twisted. Unknown numbers at 3:30 a.m. meant one thing: the hospital. Something had happened to Mom. She answered before her brain could catch up to her fear. "Hello? Miss Chen." The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Marcus Ricci. We met last night." Sophie sat up so fast her head spun. "Marcus. The man with the expensive suit who picked up cannoli every Saturday. How did you get my number?" "Mr. Castellano would like to see you. It's 3:30 in the morning." "Yes, ma'am. A car is waiting outside your building." Sophie's blood went cold. She crossed to her window and pulled back the curtain. Sure enough, a black SUV sat at the curb, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cool night air. "I don't understand," she said, her voice tight. I helped Nico. He's safe. What else could... Mr. Castellano will explain. The driver will wait 10 minutes. The line went dead. Sophie stood frozen, her phone still pressed to her ear. This wasn't a request. The car outside, the call at 3:30 a.m. The calm certainty in Marcus's voice, none of it suggested she had a choice. She thought about ignoring it, turning off her phone, pretending she'd slept through the call. But the SUV outside her building said that it wouldn't work. If Alessandro Castellano wanted to see her, he'd find a way to make it happen. This is insane, Sophie muttered, but she was already pulling on jeans and a sweater. She left her apartment 7 minutes later, her hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her face bare of makeup. If she was being summoned at 3:30 in the morning, vanity seemed pointless. The SUV's back door opened before she reached it. The interior was all black, leather and tinted windows. A different man sat in the driver's seat, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. "Miss Chen," he said politely, "please, make yourself comfortable. Where are we going?" "Mr. Castellano's home. The house with the fountain and the gate with lions." Nico's description suddenly felt a lot more significant. Sophie climbed in because what else could she do? The door closed with an expensive thunk, and the SUV pulled away from her building with barely a sound. They drove through empty streets, past closed shops and dark apartment windows. Little Italy looked different at this hour. Quieter, more secretive, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. After 15 minutes, the SUV turned onto a street Sophie had never been down. The houses here were different, larger, set back from the road behind gates and walls. Old money and older secrets. The SUV stopped in front of a gate that made Sophie's breath catch. Wrought iron, elaborate scrollwork, and right in the center, 2 lions facing each other, black metal with gold leafing that caught the streetlight. The gate opened automatically. The driveway beyond was long, lined with perfectly manicured hedges and antique lampposts that cast pools of golden light. At the end stood a house that looked like it had been transported from Italy. 3 stories of cream-colored stone, arched windows, and a fountain in the circular drive where water caught the light in glittering arcs. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. The SUV stopped at the front steps. The driver came around and opened Sophie's door. "Mr. Castellano is waiting in his study. Marcus will escort you." Sure enough, Marcus appeared at the top of the steps. He looked exactly the same as he had 12 hours ago. Suit pressed, expression neutral, eyes that saw everything. "Miss Chen," he gestured for her to follow. "This way." Sophie climbed the steps on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The front door opened into a foyer that belonged in a museum. Marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than her entire life, and paintings on the walls that looked very old and very expensive. "Mr. Castellano is protective of his privacy," Marcus said as they walked down a hallway lined with more art. "What you see here, what you hear here, stays here. Understood?" "I didn't ask to come here," Sophie pointed out. "Nevertheless." Marcus stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. "Understood?" Sophie met his eyes. "Understood." He knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response. The study was exactly what Sophie would have expected if she'd let herself imagine it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk that looked hand-carved, leather chairs that probably cost more than her yearly salary, and standing by the window with a glass of amber liquid in his hand, Alessandro Castellano. In the alley, he'd been shadows and intensity. Here, in his own space, Sophie could actually see him clearly. He was probably in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face was all sharp angles and strong features, the kind of handsome that was more intimidating than attractive. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that were corded with muscle. No tie. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Sophie Chen," he said, turning from the window. His voice was different than she remembered. Quieter, almost gentle. "Thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" His lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. "No." At least he was honest. "Sit." He gestured to one of the leather chairs. Sophie remained standing. "Why am I here?" Alessandro studied her for a long moment, then set down his glass and crossed to his desk. He pulled out a folder and held it up. "Because in the 6 hours since you found my son, I've learned everything about you." Sophie's stomach dropped. "What?" Sophie Chen, 24 years old. Born and raised in Little Italy, father deceased. mother currently in Riverside Care Facility recovering from a stroke. His eyes never left hers as he recited her life like he was reading a grocery list. You were accepted to Northwestern Law School with a full scholarship. You deferred once, then withdrew entirely when your mother's medical bills became unmanageable. Stop, Sophie said, her voice shaking. You work at Moretti's Bakery, 6 days a week, 16-hour shifts. You make $9.50 an hour, which isn't enough to cover your mother's care, your rent, and your own expenses. He paused. You're 3 months behind on rent. Your landlord is threatening eviction. Stop. You're drowning, Sophie, and you're too proud to ask for help. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt exposed, flayed open. Every private struggle laid bare for this stranger to examine. How dare you, she whispered. I dare because my son was alone in an alley, terrified and vulnerable, and you were the only person who stopped. Alessandro's voice intensified. Do you understand how rare that is? How many people walked past him? That doesn't give you the right to investigate me like I'm a criminal. No, it gives me the obligation to understand who showed my son kindness. He came around the desk, moving closer. And what I found is a woman who sacrificed everything for her mother, who works herself to exhaustion for pennies, who gives away her last bread to a hungry child. Sophie's hands clenched into fists. If this is leading to some kind of job offer, I'm not interested. It's not a job offer. Alessandro stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. It's a proposal. I don't understand. Nico's mother died 2 years ago, Alessandro said quietly. Cancer. She was gone within 6 months of diagnosis. His expression flickered with old pain. Since then, Nico has been lost, withdrawn. The therapist says he's struggling with attachment, that he's afraid to care about people because people leave. Sophie's anger faltered, replaced by unwilling sympathy. Last night was the first time in months I've seen him smile, Alessandro continued. The first time he's talked about someone with genuine affection. You did that. In 30 minutes, you did what therapists and nannies and everyone else has failed to do for 2 years. He was scared. I was kind. That's all. That's everything. Alessandro's intensity made her breath catch. I want to hire you. I told you. I'm not. To be part of Nico's life. He cut through her protest. Not as a nanny, not as staff. As someone who cares about him. Someone he can trust. Sophie stared at him. You want to pay me to be Nico's friend? I want to give you the freedom to be in his life without destroying yourself in the process. Alessandro gestured to the folder. Your mother's medical bills, paid in full. Your rent, covered for the next year. A salary that lets you breathe for the first time in 8 months. It was too much, too generous, too impossible. Why? Sophie asked. Why would you do this for a stranger? Because you're not a stranger anymore. Alessandro's eyes held hers. You're the woman who saved my son. And in my world, Sophie Chen, that makes you family. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she didn't fully understand. I need time to think, Sophie said finally. You have until morning. The offer expires at dawn. That's 4 hours from now. Yes. Alessandro's expression was implacable. Marcus will take you home. But know this, if you walk away, if you choose to go back to your life and forget Nico exists, I'll respect that decision, but I won't make this offer again. Sophie felt trapped, not by threat, but by the genuine desperation she saw in Alessandro's eyes. This wasn't about power or control. This was about a father who'd do anything for his son. Can I see him? She heard herself ask. Before I decide? Alessandro's surprise was visible. He's sleeping. I know. I just want to see him. After a long moment, Alessandro nodded. Follow me. They walked in silence through the house. Sophie tried not to gawk at the opulence, the art, the furniture, the sheer scale of it all. This was a different world, a world she didn't belong in. Alessandro stopped outside a door on the 2nd floor. He opened it quietly, revealing a bedroom that looked like a child's dream. Bookshelves full of stories, a telescope by the window, toys organized with careful precision, and in the center of a massive bed, buried under blankets, Nico slept. Sophie stepped inside, moving quietly across plush carpet. In sleep, Nico looked younger than 6. Vulnerable. His dark hair was messy against the pillow, and he clutched something against his chest, her denim jacket. He'd kept it. He refused to let the housekeeper wash it. Alessandro said quietly from the doorway. Said it smells like bread and Sophie. Her eyes burned. She reached out and brushed Nico's hair back from his forehead, the gesture automatic. He stirred slightly, mumbling something unintelligible, then settled back into sleep. He needs stability, Alessandro said. People who stay. People who keep their promises. I would never hurt him, Sophie whispered. I know. That's why I'm asking you to stay. Sophie looked at Nico's peaceful face, at her jacket clutched in his small hands, and felt something crack open in her chest. She thought about the alley, about his tears and his fear, and the way he'd looked at her like she was safe. She thought about her mother in the care facility, about the bills that never stopped coming, about the exhaustion that was slowly killing her. She thought about Alessandro's folder full of her private pain, and she thought about what it meant to be offered a lifeline when you were drowning. I'll do it, she said quietly. But I have conditions. Alessandro stepped into the room. Name them. I'm not changing who I am. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not to fit into your world. I don't want you to. I need to keep working at the bakery. Part-time at least. Mr. Moretti has been good to me. I won't abandon him. Agreed. And I want to keep my apartment. I need a place that's mine. Alessandro's jaw tightened slightly. That's not negotiable. Sophie's spine stiffened. Then we don't have a deal. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Sophie turned to face him fully, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Nico. You can buy my time. You can pay my bills. But you cannot buy me. I'm not a possession. I'm not staff. And I'm certainly not something you can lock away in this house for safekeeping. They stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. There are dangers you don't know about, Alessandro said finally. Threats you can't comprehend. Keeping you safe means what? Controlling where I live? Where I go? Sophie shook her head. If that's your version of safety, then I'm walking away right now. For a long moment, she thought he'd refuse. Thought he'd show her exactly what kind of man he really was, the kind who didn't take no for an answer. But then his expression shifted. Not defeat, exactly. More like recognition. You're going to be difficult, aren't you? He said quietly. Probably. The corner of his mouth twitched. Good. Nico needs someone strong enough to stand up to me. Is that a yes? That's a yes. With one modification: security. What kind of security? The kind that keeps you alive. Alessandro's tone made it clear this wasn't negotiable. You keep your apartment, but you accept protection. A driver. A security detail when necessary. No arguments. Sophie wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence completely. But looking at Alessandro's face, at the genuine fear beneath his controlled exterior, she understood. This wasn't about control. This was about a man who'd already lost too much. Fine, she said. But they stay outside. My apartment is still mine. Agreed. They stood in Nico's room, two strangers bound by a sleeping child and impossible promises, and Sophie felt the last threads of her old life slipping away. When do I start? She asked. Today, after you've slept. Alessandro glanced at the window, where the sky was starting to lighten with the approach of dawn. Marcus will take you home. Get some rest. He'll pick you up at noon. Sophie nodded, taking one last look at Nico. Does he know? About your offer? Not yet. I wanted your answer first. He might not want me around. He kept your jacket, Sophie. He wants you around. She couldn't argue with that. Marcus drove her home in silence. The SUV pulled up outside her building, just as the first rays of sun painted the brick buildings gold. Sophie climbed out, exhausted and overwhelmed and terrified of what she'd just agreed to. Miss Chen, Marcus said before she could close the door. She looked back. Mr. Castellano is a good man, he said quietly. Whatever you think about him, about this world, remember that. He's good man who's trying to protect what matters most to him. And what's that? His son. Marcus paused. And now, apparently, you. The door closed, and the SUV pulled away. Sophie climbed the 4 flights to her apartment, locked the door, and collapsed on her couch. Her phone showed 6 missed calls from the hospital billing department and 1 text from Mr. Moretti asking if she was feeling okay, since she'd never missed an opening shift before. She stared at the ceiling, her mind spinning. 24 hours ago, she'd been a bakery worker drowning in debt and exhaustion. Now she was. What? Part of Alessandro Castellano's household? Under his protection? Bound to his son? Her phone buzzed with a new notification. A bank alert. She opened it, expecting another overdraft warning. Instead, she saw a deposit. $50,000. Her hands started shaking. A text came through from an unknown number. First month's salary. Your mother's bills have been paid. Welcome to the family. A. C. Sophie's vision blurred with tears. She didn't know if they were from relief or terror or something in between. What had she done? But deep down, beneath the fear and uncertainty, she knew the answer. She'd made a choice. To help a child who needed her. To accept help when she was drowning. To step into a world she didn't understand because staying in her own was slowly killing her. She'd chosen Alessandro Castellano. And somehow, she knew with bone-deep certainty, there would be no going back. Marcus picked her up at exactly noon. Sophie had managed 3 hours of restless sleep, a shower, and the mental gymnastics of explaining to Mr. Moretti why she needed to reduce her hours. Family situation, she'd said, which wasn't exactly a lie. Mr. Moretti had studied her face for a long moment. The Castellano boy? Sophie's surprise must have shown. This neighborhood talk, Sophie. Word travels fast when Alessandro Castellano's son goes missing. Mr. Moretti's expression was knowing. And when a certain bakery girl finds him. I'm just helping with childcare, Sophie said quickly. Mr. Moretti didn't look convinced. Be careful, Sophie. That family, they're not like us. I know. Do you? His weathered hand patted her shoulder. Just remember, you're always welcome here, no matter what happens. The warning stayed with her as Marcus drove through Little Italy. They passed her building, heading toward a part of the neighborhood she rarely visited. The part where houses had gates and security cameras. Nico doesn't know you're coming, Marcus said, breaking the silence. Mr. Castellano wanted it to be a surprise. Sophie's stomach flipped. What if he doesn't want me here? He'll want you here. The SUV turned through the gates with the gold lions. In daylight, the house was even more impressive. Cream stone glowed in the September sun. The fountain sparkled. Everything looked like a postcard from another life. Marcus opened her door. Ready? No, not even close. But Sophie nodded anyway. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression neutral but assessing. She wore a simple dress and an apron dusted with flour. You must be Sophie, the woman said. I'm Rosa. I run the household. Nice to meet you. Rosa's eyes swept over Sophie, taking in her thrifted jeans and simple sweater. Whatever she thought, she kept it to herself. Nico is in the garden with his father. This way. Sophie followed Rosa through the house, trying not to stare at everything. The marble, the art, the sheer excess of it all. This wasn't just wealth. This was generational power. They walked through French doors onto a terrace that overlooked a garden straight out of a magazine. Perfectly trimmed hedges, flowers in careful arrangements. And in the center, near a koi pond, Alessandro and Nico sat at a small table having lunch. Sophie's chest tightened at the sight. Alessandro was still in his dress shirt from the morning, but he'd rolled up his sleeves and looked more relaxed. Nico was talking animatedly, his hands moving as he described something with 6-year-old enthusiasm. They looked like a normal father and son. Almost. Rosa cleared her throat. Mr. Castellano, your guest has arrived. Both heads turned. Nico's eyes went wide. Sophie, preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. He launched himself from his chair and ran full speed across the garden. Sophie barely had time to brace herself before 45 pounds of excited child slammed into her legs. You came, Nico said, his face pressed against her stomach. Daddy said you might come, but I didn't believe him because everyone always says they'll come back and then they don't. But you did. Sophie's throat closed up. She knelt down and pulled Nico into a proper hug. I promised I wouldn't leave you, remember? In the alley. In the alley. Nico pulled back, his face serious. Are you staying? Like really staying? Or just for today? Sophie glanced up at Alessandro, who was watching them with an expression she couldn't read. I'm staying, she said carefully. If you want me to. Yes. Nico's face transformed with joy. Yes, I want you to stay forever and ever. Forever might be a long time. Good. Nico grabbed her hand. Come see the koi. They're huge, and Daddy says they're older than me, and I named one Frank. You named a koi fish Frank? It seemed right. Alessandro had crossed the garden while she was distracted. He stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, looking more uncertain than she'd seen him. "Thank you for coming. You made it hard to refuse," Sophie pointed out. "That was the point." Nico tugged on her hand. "Sophie, come on. Frank is waiting." "Go," Alessandro said quietly. "I'll have Rosa bring out lunch for you." Sophie let Nico drag her to the pond, where she dutifully admired Frank the koi, and learned all about the pond's ecosystem according to a 6-year-old. But even as she listened to Nico's chatter, she was hyper-aware of Alessandro watching from the terrace. She'd stepped into his world, into his home, into his son's life. And somehow, she knew that the most dangerous thing about Alessandro Castellano wasn't his power or his reputation or even his wealth. It was the way he looked at her like she was something precious he intended to protect, whether she wanted that protection or not. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Lunch was a surreal experience. Sophie sat at an outdoor table that probably cost more than her yearly rent, eating food prepared by a professional chef, while Nico chattered about everything and nothing. Alessandro mostly listened, his attention divided between his son and Sophie in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Sophie," Nico said around a mouthful of pasta, "do you like dinosaurs? I think they're pretty cool." "Good, because I have 73 of them and you need to meet all of them. They have names and personalities and everything." 73 is a lot of dinosaurs. "I know, but they were lonely until I gave them families." Nico's expression turned serious. Everyone needs a family. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Alessandro's jaw tightened slightly, and Sophie wondered how many times he'd heard similar sentiments from his son, how many times Nico had expressed his loneliness in small, heartbreaking ways. "You're right," Sophie said gently. "Everyone does need a family. Will you be my family?" Nico asked, his enormous brown eyes locked on hers. "Not like a mommy, because I know you're not my mommy and that's okay. But like a friend who stays?" Sophie's eyes burned. She looked at Alessandro, seeking permission or guidance or something. He gave a slight nod, his expression carefully neutral. "I'd be honored to be your family, Nico," Sophie said quietly. Nico's smile could have powered the entire city. "Okay, good. Now you have to see my room and the dinosaurs and my telescope, and there's a library that's bigger than your whole apartment probably." "How do you know how big my apartment is?" Nico looked guilty. "I might have asked Daddy to describe it." Alessandro had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. He was curious. "It's tiny," Sophie said to Nico. "One room that's smaller than your bedroom closet, probably." "That's okay. You can stay here whenever you want. We have 17 bedrooms." 17? I counted, Nico said proudly. "Most of them are empty, though. It's kind of creepy sometimes." Alessandro's expression flickered with something that might have been regret. This massive house, all this space, and his son still felt lonely in it. After lunch, Nico gave Sophie the tour. He was right, the library was bigger than her apartment. Floor-to-ceiling books, rolling ladders, leather chairs that begged to be read in. It smelled like old paper and possibility. "This was my favorite room when I was younger," Alessandro said from the doorway. Sophie hadn't heard him follow them. "When you were younger?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound like that was a century ago." 36 feels like a century sometimes. Nico had already moved on, running toward the next room. Alessandro and Sophie followed at a more sedate pace, the silence between them not quite comfortable but not hostile either. "You're good with him," Alessandro said finally. "He's an easy kid to be good with." "Not everyone thinks so. The last 3 nannies quit within a month." Sophie glanced at him. "Why?" "They said he was too quiet, too withdrawn. One of them said he was creepy, that he stared too much and never smiled." Alessandro's voice was tight with controlled anger. "She didn't last the day after I found out." "He's grieving," Sophie said quietly. "And scared. That's not creepy. That's normal. Try finding childcare professionals who understand that." They walked through a game room with a pool, table, and vintage arcade machines. Nico was already setting up something involving dinosaurs and a complicated narrative about meteor strikes. "Sophie," Alessandro said, stopping her with a hand on her arm. The touch was light, careful, but it sent electricity through her skin. "I need you to understand something." She turned to face him. "What?" "This world I'm bringing you into, it's not safe." His dark eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. My family has enemies. People who would hurt Nico to hurt me. People who would see you as leverage the moment they understand how much you mean to him. I'm just his friend. That makes you valuable. Alessandro's grip tightened slightly, and in my world, valuable things become targets. Sophie's mouth went dry. Are you trying to scare me? I'm trying to make you understand what you've agreed to. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle. The security isn't optional. The rules aren't suggestions. If I tell you to do something, you do it. Not because I'm controlling, but because your life might depend on it. I'm not good at taking orders. I've noticed. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face. But you're going to have to learn. Or what? Or I'll make you. His voice dropped lower. And trust me, Sophie Chen, you don't want to find out how persuasive I can be when it comes to protecting what's mine. The possessive way he said mine should have angered her, should have made her pull away and remind him that she wasn't his property. But instead, it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. I'm not yours, she said, but her voice came out breathier than she intended. Not yet. Alessandro's eyes dropped to her lips for just a second before meeting her gaze again. But you will be. Before Sophie could process that statement, before she could decide if it was a threat or a promise or something in between, Nico's voice cut through the tension. Sophie, come see. The T-Rex is having an existential crisis about his short arms. Alessandro stepped back, the intensity disappearing like a switch had been flipped. We should go. Existential crises wait for no one. Sophie followed on unsteady legs, her heart hammering and her mind racing. What had just happened? What had Alessandro meant? And why did part of her want to find out? The afternoon blurred into evening. Sophie played with Nico, admired all 73 dinosaurs, each with distinct personalities, as promised, and learned that a 6-year-old's energy was infinite, while her own decidedly was not. By 7 p.m., she was exhausted. Nico had finally worn himself out and was curled on a couch in the media room, fighting sleep while watching a nature documentary about whales. He likes you, Alessandro said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of wine. He offered her one. Sophie hesitated, then took it. I like him too. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Nico's eyes droop lower and lower. His mother would have liked you, Alessandro said quietly. Maria. She was. She believed in kindness, in doing the right thing even when it was hard. His expression tightened with old pain. She would have stopped in that alley too. I'm sorry, Sophie said, that you lost her. So am I. Alessandro took a long drink of his wine. But I can't change the past. All I can do is protect what remains. Nico? And now you. There it was again. That possessive certainty that should have frightened her. I don't need protecting, Sophie said, but even she didn't believe it. Alessandro turned to look at her, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering light from the television. Everyone needs protecting, Sophie. Even the strongest people break eventually. Is that what you do? Break people? When necessary. He didn't flinch from the question. But never people I care about. You don't know me well enough to care about me. Don't I? Alessandro set down his wine glass. I know you sacrificed your dreams for your mother. I know you work yourself to exhaustion and never complain. I know you gave your jacket to my son, and your bread, and your time when you had nothing to spare. He stepped closer. I know more about your character from one night than most people reveal in a lifetime. Sophie's breath caught. That doesn't mean, Sophie. Nico's sleepy voice interrupted. Are you leaving? She looked over to find him sitting up, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but his expression anxious. Not yet, she said gently. But you're going to. Everyone leaves at night. The words were simple, but the pain behind them was anything but. This little boy had watched his mother die, had watched nannies come and go, had learned that night meant being alone. Sophie made a decision that would change everything. What if I stayed? She said. Just for tonight. Would that help? Nico's face lit up. Really? Sophie looked at Alessandro, waiting for him to object, to remind her of boundaries or propriety or any of the 1,000 reasons this was a bad idea. Instead, he just nodded once. Rosa can prepare a guest room. Wait, Sophie said. I need to get things from my apartment, and I should check on my mom. I'll have someone collect whatever you need, Alessandro said. And I've arranged for private nursing for your mother. 24-hour care. She'll have everything she needs. Of course he had, because Alessandro Castellano didn't make offers without already having solved every problem. You're very sure of yourself, Sophie said. I'm very sure of what I want. His eyes held hers. And I always get what I want. 3 hours later, Sophie found herself in a guest room that was bigger than her entire apartment. King-sized bed with sheets that felt like silk. An ensuite bathroom with a tub that could fit 4 people. A walk-in closet that made her laugh because she owned maybe 15 items of clothing total. Someone had already delivered a bag from her apartment. All her essentials, plus things she hadn't asked for. New toiletries. A robe that probably cost more than her weekly salary used to. Everything she might need. She showered, changed into her own pajamas, worn cotton that felt shabby against all this luxury, and was about to climb into bed when a soft knock made her freeze. Sophie? Nico's voice came through the door. Are you awake? She opened it to find him standing in the hallway in dinosaur pajamas, holding a stuffed lion that had seen better days. Can't sleep? She asked gently. He shook his head. I keep thinking you might disappear. Sophie's heart cracked. She knelt down to his level. I'm right here. But what if you're not in the morning? She understood that fear. The terror that good things were temporary. That people you cared about vanished. How about this? Sophie said. What if I make you a promise? And I never, ever break my promises. Nico's eyes were huge. What promise? I promise that if I ever have to leave, I'll tell you first. I'll say goodbye properly. No disappearing. No vanishing in the night. She held out her pinky. Deal? Nico stared at her pinky like it was the most important thing in the world. Then slowly, solemnly, he linked his pinky with hers. Deal, he whispered. Now can you sleep? He bit his lip. Maybe if you read me a story? Just one? Sophie glanced down the hallway, wondering if Alessandro would appear and tell her she was overstepping. But the corridor remained empty. One story, she agreed. But then sleep. Deal? Deal. Nico's room was exactly what she'd expected. Organized but loved. Books everywhere. The telescope by the window. Dinosaurs arranged in careful formations. And on the nightstand, her denim jacket, folded neatly. He caught her looking. I know it's yours, but it makes me feel safe. You can keep it as long as you want. Nico climbed into his massive bed and patted in the space beside him. Sophie sat on top of the covers and picked up the book. He handed her something about a dragon who was afraid of heights. She read slowly, doing voices for each character. Nico giggled at her dragon impression, his small body gradually relaxing against her side. By the time the dragon learned to fly, Nico was asleep. Sophie closed the book carefully and tried to extract herself without waking him. But the moment she moved, his hand grabbed her sleeve. Don't go, he mumbled, still mostly asleep. I'm just going back to my room. Stay, please. Sophie looked at this little boy who'd lost so much, who was so afraid of losing more, and she couldn't make herself leave. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. She settled back against the headboard, prepared for an uncomfortable few hours. But the bed was so soft, and the room was so quiet, and she was so exhausted from the emotional whiplash of the past 30 hours. Her eyes closed just for a moment. Just for a moment. Alessandro found them at midnight. He'd been working in his study, trying to focus on shipment manifests and territory negotiations. But his mind kept drifting back to Sophie Chen, the way she'd looked at him in the game room, the way she hadn't backed down when he'd tried to intimidate her, the way she'd agreed to stay. He'd gone to check on Nico one last time before bed, expecting to find his son asleep alone as always. Instead, he found Sophie curled on top of the covers, Nico tucked against her side, both of them deeply asleep. Alessandro stood in the doorway, unable to move. Sophie's hair had come loose from its ponytail and fell across her face. One hand rested protectively on Nico's shoulder. She looked young and vulnerable and completely out of place in this world of wealth and danger. And Nico was smiling in his sleep. Alessandro's chest constricted with an emotion he couldn't name. When was the last time he'd seen his son look peaceful? When was the last time anyone had cared enough to stay when Nico was afraid? He should wake Sophie, send her back to the guest room, maintain appropriate boundaries between staff and family. Except Sophie wasn't staff. She wasn't hired help. She was. What was she? Alessandro stepped into the room and carefully pulled a blanket over both of them. Sophie stirred slightly but didn't wake. Nico's hand tightened in her sleeve like even in sleep, he was afraid she'd disappear. I'll keep you both safe, Alessandro said quietly, a promise to his sleeping son and the woman who'd already worked her way into both their lives, no matter what it costs. He left the room and closed the door silently. Marcus was waiting in the hallway, his expression knowing. "She's not what you expected, is she?" Marcus said quietly. "No." Alessandro looked back at the closed door. "She's more. You know what this means. Once the families find out about her." "They won't." Alessandro's voice turned hard. "No one outside this house knows she exists, and that's how it stays. For how long? She has a life, an apartment, a job. Not anymore." Alessandro met Marcus's eyes. "As of today, Sophie Chen is under my personal protection. That means she stays here, where I can keep her safe. She's not going to like that." "No," Alessandro agreed, "but she'll accept it, eventually. And if she doesn't?" Alessandro thought about Sophie's defiant chin when she'd insisted on keeping her apartment, her refusal to be controlled, her absolute certainty that she didn't need his protection. "Then I'll make her," he said simply, "because I've already lost too much. I won't lose her too." Marcus nodded slowly. "The men are asking questions. About who she is, why she's here. Tell them she's family, off limits. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally." The threat was clear. In Alessandro's world, answering to him personally meant only one thing. "Understood," Marcus said. Alessandro returned to his study but didn't try to work. Instead, he poured himself another whiskey and stood by the window, looking out over his estate. The walls, the gates, the security measures that turned his home into a fortress, all of it to protect what mattered. And now, whether she knew it or not, Sophie Chen was part of what mattered. He'd seen the way Nico looked at her, had heard the first genuine laughter from his son in 2 years, had watched his boy smile and trust and hope again. That alone would have been enough to make Sophie valuable. But it wasn't just Nico. Alessandro thought about Sophie's defiance, her strength, her absolute refusal to be anything other than herself, the way she'd challenged him without fear, the way she'd made him feel something other than the cold calculation that had defined his life since Maria's death. She was dangerous, not because she threatened him, but because she made him want things he'd given up on. Like softness, like peace, like a life that wasn't measured in territory and violence. "Idiota," he muttered to himself. Foolish. But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Sophie Chen had walked into his life less than 48 hours ago, and already she'd changed everything. And Alessandro Castellano, who'd built an empire on control and certainty, had no idea what to do with a woman who made him feel completely out of control. The only thing he knew for certain was that he wouldn't let her go. Couldn't let her go. Even if keeping her safe meant becoming the thing she'd eventually hate. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and a small body pressed against her side. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back Alessandro's house, Nico's fears, her promise to stay. She'd fallen asleep in his bed. "Morning," Nico mumbled, his eyes still closed. "You stayed. I promised I would." He smiled without opening his eyes and burrowed closer. Sophie's heart squeezed. How had this little boy worked his way so completely under her skin in less than 2 days? A throat cleared from the doorway. Alessandro stood there in a fresh suit, looking like he'd been awake for hours. His expression was unreadable as he took in the sight of Sophie and Nico, tangled together in the massive bed. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Rosa has breakfast ready. Nico, go wash up." Nico groaned but obeyed, sliding out of bed and padding toward his bathroom. The moment he was gone, the atmosphere in the room shifted. "I should explain," Sophie started. He was scared. "You stayed." Alessandro's voice was neutral. "There's nothing to explain. I didn't mean to fall asleep." "Sophie." He stepped into the room, moving closer. "Do you know what I saw when I checked on him last night?" She shook her head. "My son smiling in his sleep, for the first time since his mother died." Alessandro's dark eyes held hers. "You gave him that, so please don't apologize for being exactly what he needs." The intensity in his voice made her skin warm. She stood, suddenly aware of how rumpled she must look. Her hair was a mess, her pajamas wrinkled, and she was standing in a child's bedroom with a man who looked at her like she was something precious and breakable. "I should go change," she said, "after breakfast." It wasn't a request. They ate on the terrace fresh pastries, fruit, coffee that tasted like heaven. Nico chattered about his plans for the day, which apparently involved teaching Sophie everything about constellations. We can use the telescope tonight, he said excitedly. If Sophie's still here. She's still here, Alessandro said firmly. Sophie opened her mouth to point out that she had a life, an apartment, responsibilities. But the hope in Nico's eyes stopped her. I'm still here, she agreed. For today. After breakfast, Nico dragged her to the library for constellation lessons. Alessandro disappeared into his study for business, which Sophie suspected meant things she was better off not knowing. It's about. The morning passed in a blur of books and Nico's enthusiasm. Around 11, Rosa appeared with lunch sandwiches and lemonade served in the garden. Mr. Castellano asked me to tell you he'll be occupied until this evening, Rosa said, her tone neutral but her eyes assessing. He said you should make yourself comfortable. Thank you. Rosa hesitated, then sat down on the bench beside Sophie. Nico had wandered off to examine something in the flowers. You're wondering what you've gotten yourself into, Rosa said. It wasn't a question. Sophie laughed without humor. Is it that obvious? You're a smart girl, smart enough to be scared. Rosa's weathered hands folded in her lap, but not smart enough to run. Should I run? Should I run? Most people would. Rosa watched Nico, her expression softening. But most people wouldn't have stopped in that alley. Wouldn't have given their jacket to a crying child. Wouldn't have stayed when that child was afraid of the dark. He's a good kid. He is, and his father is a good man. Rosa met Sophie's eyes. A dangerous man. Yes. A man who does terrible things sometimes, but good, in the ways that matter. You've known him a long time? Since he was younger than Nico. I worked for his father first. Watched Alessandro grow up. Watched him fall in love with Maria. Watched him break when she died. Rosa's voice was gentle. He's been hollow since then. Going through motions. Building walls. Why are you telling me this? Because yesterday I heard him laugh. Actually laugh. Not that polite sound he makes for business. Rosa stood, brushing imaginary dust from her apron. You're either very good for this family, or you're going to destroy what's left of it. I'm hoping for the first. She walked away, leaving Sophie with more questions than answers. The afternoon stretched into evening. Sophie and Nico built an elaborate dinosaur civilization in the game room, complete with government structures and complex social hierarchies. The T-Rex is president, Nico explained seriously. But the velociraptors control the military, so there's tension. Political intrigue in the dinosaur world. I like it. Daddy says all governments have tension. It's about who has power and who wants it. Nico arranged two dinosaurs facing each other. And sometimes people fight. The casual way he said it made Sophie's chest tighten. What kind of conversations happened in this house? What had Nico absorbed from living in Alessandro's world? Hey, she said gently. You know fighting isn't always the answer, right? Sometimes people can talk things out. Nico looked at her with eyes too old for his face. Daddy says some people don't listen to talking. They only understand strength. Your daddy might be right sometimes, but there are other kinds of strength too, like kindness. Like choosing not to fight when you could. Nico considered this. Is that why you helped me? Because you're strong in the kindness way? Maybe. Or maybe I just knew you needed help, and I could give it. I'm glad you're the kindness strong, Nico said. Daddy's the other kind. Together you're like, super strong. The innocent logic made Sophie laugh, but unease curled in her stomach. Nico was already building a world where she and Alessandro were a unit, a team, together. She needed to be careful, needed to maintain boundaries, needed to remember this was temporary, helping a child through grief, nothing more, except it already felt like more. At 7 p.m., Marcus appeared in the game room doorway. Miss Chen, Mr. Castellano requests your presence in his study. Requests or demands? Sophie asked before she could stop herself. Marcus's lips twitched. With Mr. Castellano, there's not much difference. Nico looked up from his dinosaurs. Are you in trouble? I don't think so. If you are, I'll tell Daddy it's my fault. That's what families do. Sophie ruffled his hair. I'll be fine. Keep the velociraptors from staging a coup while I'm gone. Alessandro's study was exactly as she remembered him posing. Masculine, expensive. He stood by the window with a drink in his hand, his posture tense. Close the door, he said without turning. Sophie did, her nerves jangling. Is something wrong? That depends on your definition. Alessandro turned, and his expression made her breath catch. Not angry exactly, but intense. focused. Sit. I'd rather stand. Sophie. His voice dropped to that commanding tone that made her spine straighten. Sit. Please. The please softened it enough that she obeyed, settling into one of the leather chairs. Alessandro remained standing, which put her at a disadvantage. She suspected that was intentional. I've been thinking about our arrangement, he said. Her stomach dropped. You want to end it? No. He moved closer. I want to change it. Change it how? Your apartment. I want you to give it up. Sophie stood so fast the chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. We agreed. We agreed before I fully understood the situation. Alessandro set down his drink. Before I knew about Victor Russo. The name meant nothing to her. Who? The head of the Russo family. My primary rival in this city. Alessandro's jaw tightened. This morning one of my men reported that Russo's people have been asking questions. About a woman seen with Nico. About who she is and where she lives. Ice flooded Sophie's veins. How would they even know? Because you were seen. In the alley. In the SUV. Information travels fast in this world. Alessandro stepped closer, and she could see genuine fear beneath his controlled exterior. Your apartment is a security nightmare. One entrance, no protection. In a neighborhood where Russo's men operate freely. So put security there like you promised. Security isn't enough. Not against what Russo would do if he decided you were valuable. Alessandro's voice went hard. Do you know what happens to people Russo wants to hurt? What he did? To the last person who crossed him? I don't want to know. Yes, you do. Because you need to understand why I'm not asking anymore. He moved into her space, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He took the man's 16-year-old daughter, held her for 3 days. When they found her body, she'd been... Stop. Sophie's voice shook. Just stop. You need to hear this. No, I don't. Because you're trying to scare me into compliance. I'm trying to keep you alive. The words came out sharp, almost desperate. Do you think I want to control you? Take away your independence? I don't. But I will if it means you're safe. That's not your choice to make. It is. Alessandro's hands came up to frame her face, forcing her to look at him. The moment you helped Nico, the moment you walked into our lives, you became mine to protect. That's not a choice, Sophie. That's a fact. His touch was gentle despite his words. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones with impossible tenderness. I'm not yours, Sophie whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? His eyes searched hers. You stayed last night. You promised Nico you wouldn't disappear. You ate at my table, slept under my roof, and spent the day making my son laugh. His voice dropped lower. You're already mine, Sophie. You just haven't accepted it yet. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should pull away. Should remind him that she was a person, not property. Should defend her independence and autonomy. But his hands were warm on her face, and his eyes held such raw need that her arguments died in her throat. What if I can't do this? She said instead. What if I can't live in your world? Then I'll change my world. The words were simple, absolute. Whatever it takes to keep you and Nico safe. Whatever I have to do. Before Sophie could respond, before she could process what he was offering, a sharp knock interrupted them. Alessandro's hands dropped, and his expression shifted instantly from vulnerable to dangerous. What? Marcus opened the door, his face grim. Sir, we have a situation. How bad? Russo's men grabbed one of ours. Tony Bellucci. They're demanding a meeting. Alessandro's jaw clenched. When? Tonight, 9 p.m. The warehouse on Hamilton. That's Russo territory. Yes, sir. He's making a statement. Sophie watched Alessandro transform. The man who'd touched her with such tenderness disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. This was the other Alessandro, the dangerous one, the one who did terrible things. Fine, Alessandro said. We'll meet. Full security detail. Sir, it's a trap. Of course it's a trap, but if I don't go, Tony's dead. And we look weak. Alessandro moved toward his desk, already shifting into strategy mode. Get Vincent and the others. We leave in an hour. Marcus nodded and left. Sophie stood frozen, forgotten in the sudden crisis. She should leave, should let Alessandro handle his business, should remember that this wasn't her world. But watching him plan what was clearly a dangerous confrontation, knowing he was walking into a trap, something in her chest pulled tight. You can't go, she said. Alessandro looked up, surprised she was still there. I have to. But you said it's a trap. It is. But I can't show weakness. In this world, Sophie, the moment you show fear is the moment you die. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a gun. The sight of it made her stomach lurch. What about Nico? She asked. What if something happens to you? Nico will be protected. I've made arrangements. Rosa knows what to do. Marcus will. That's not what I meant. Sophie crossed to the desk. What about Nico losing another parent? What about him waking up tomorrow and finding out his father died walking into an obvious trap? Alessandro's expression flickered. I don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Not in my world. He checked the gun with practiced efficiency, and Sophie realized this wasn't his first time preparing for violence, maybe not even his 100th. This is who I am, Sophie. This is what I do. If that's too much for you, it's not about me, it's about your son. Her voice rose. You said you'd change your world for us, but you're about to walk into a situation that could orphan Nico. And for what? Pride? Territory? Some man you barely know? For respect. Alessandro's voice was hard. Tony Bellucci has worked for my family for 15 years. He has 3 children. I don't abandon my people. The conviction in his words made her understand. This wasn't about pride. It was about loyalty. About being the kind of man who protected his own, even at personal risk. Then let me come with you, Sophie said. Absolutely not. Why? If you're so certain it's safe. It's not safe. That's the point. Alessandro moved around the desk. You stay here, with Nico, where you're protected, while you walk into danger. That's my job, Sophie. Keeping you safe. Keeping Nico safe. Even if it means... He stopped, his jaw working. Even if it means dying? She finished quietly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Sophie's hands clenched into fists. She'd known Alessandro was dangerous, had understood intellectually that his world involved violence. But facing the reality that he might not come back tonight made it visceral. I won't let Nico lose you, she said. That's not your choice. Then make it your choice. Be smart. Take precautions. Don't let pride get you killed. Something in Alessandro's expression softened. You care. I'll read the uploaded file and provide you with a 1,500-word summary. Number, summary. This is a contemporary romance story about Sophie Chen, a struggling bakery worker, and Alessandro Castellano, a mafia boss, whose lives intersect through an act of kindness involving Alessandro's son, Nico. The narrative opens with Sophie and Alessandro in his study, sharing an intimate moment before he must leave for dangerous mafia business. Despite knowing each other for only 2 days, their connection is intense. Alessandro promises to return, not just for Nico, but for Sophie too. They share a passionate kiss before he departs, leaving Sophie anxious and waiting. Over the next 3 hours, she cares for Nico while imagining terrible scenarios of Alessandro's fate. When Alessandro returns, wounded with a gunshot, graze across his shoulder, torn knuckles, and a cut above his eyebrow, Sophie's relief is overwhelming. She insists on staying with him while the doctor stitches his wound, holding his hand throughout the painful procedure. The vulnerability of the moment breaks down their remaining emotional barriers. Sophie admits she can't handle the constant danger, but also confesses that she genuinely cares about him, not just as Nico's father, but as himself. Their relationship deepens in the medical room, where physical intimacy follows emotional honesty. Despite Alessandro's injury, they make love, with Sophie taking control and Alessandro surrendering to her in ways he never does with anyone else. The scene is both tender and passionate, marking a turning point where both acknowledge their feelings are real and deepening rapidly. The story fast-forwards through their developing relationship. Alessandro works to legitimize parts of his business and reduce his involvement in violence. Sophie's debts are paid off, and Alessandro supports her dream of attending law school. She moves into his home, becoming increasingly integrated into his and Nico's lives. Rosa, the housekeeper who has served the family for 30 years, recognizes Alessandro's love for Sophie and warns her that men like him love fiercely and forever. 6 months into their relationship, Alessandro orchestrates a proposal at the park, where their story began, where Sophie first gave bread to Nico when he was lost and hungry. In front of Nico and their dog Frank, Alessandro kneels and proposes, crediting Sophie with saving both his son and himself. He acknowledges that she changed his priorities, making him want to be better and giving him reasons to be careful and think about the future. Sophie accepts immediately, understanding that she's choosing a complicated life but one filled with love. Throughout the story, Sophie grapples with the reality of loving someone in the Mafia. She witnesses violence, learns about dangerous rivalries, particularly with someone named Russo, and discovers that Alessandro's father was killed by rivals 3 years earlier. The narrative doesn't romanticize the danger. Sophie is genuinely terrified by Alessandro's world. However, she finds that her love for him and Nico is stronger than her fear. Alessandro, in turn, tries to minimize Sophie's exposure to his darker activities while being honest about who he is. The story concludes 2 years after the proposal. Sophie has completed law school and is now Sophie Chen Castellano, a practicing lawyer. She wins her first solo case defending a small business owner against a corrupt developer, the kind of case that reflects her values and her memory of being powerless. Alessandro and Nico, who now calls her Mom, attend the trial to support her. The epilogue reveals a harmonious, if imperfect, balance. Alessandro has stepped back from the most violent aspects of his business. Sophie has learned which aspects of his work not to question. They've created a functional partnership that respects both their identities. On the evening of her courtroom victory, Sophie reveals she's 8 weeks pregnant. Alessandro's joy is overwhelming, demonstrating how completely his priorities have shifted from survival to family. The story explores several key themes. The transformative power of kindness is central. Sophie's simple act of giving her last bread to a lost, hungry child catalyzed changes in multiple lives. The narrative examines how love can exist in morally complicated spaces, as Sophie loves a man who does terrible things while maintaining her own ethical compass and career helping vulnerable people. Both characters undergo significant development. Alessandro evolves from a man focused purely on survival and vengeance, following his father's murder, to someone who thinks about the future, tries to be better, and finds softness through Sophie and Nico. Sophie transforms from an exhausted, debt-ridden bakery worker with abandoned dreams into a confident lawyer, wife, and mother who has found her place while maintaining her principles. The writing employs classic romance tropes: the dangerous but devoted alpha male, the nurturing heroine who softens him, instant attraction, and the found family dynamic. However, it doesn't completely gloss over the moral complications. Sophie explicitly acknowledges Alessandro does terrible things. The story doesn't pretend the Mafia world is anything other than dangerous and violent. The pacing moves quickly, with the relationship developing over 6 months before the proposal, and concluding 2 years later, with Sophie pregnant and established in her career. The structure follows a fairy tale arc, even explicitly referencing this parallel, while grounding the story in contemporary issues like debt, career struggles, and choosing between different types of life. Ultimately, this is a story about how a single compassionate act giving bread to a hungry child created ripples that transformed multiple lives, building an unconventional but loving family from fragments of kindness, danger, and fierce devotion. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.